in it and moved it, made it into the string orchestra version, which we recorded and which is a really good recording. And we were going to complement the disc. I still use the word disc, with the Richard Strauss, his final composition, the Metamorphosen, also for string orchestra, but we've been delayed and postponed. We hope to finish it in 2022, and then they'll distribute it probably within 3 to 6 months after we get them the master. So we're looking forward to that, but we hope it'll be a normal season, rather large, rather triumphant. I think the repertoire will be much to everyone's liking, unlike 2023, in which I was contemplating, Howard, doing Bruckner's Ninth, now that I've been appointed to the official lexicon of the online Anton Bruckner Society, whatever that means, because I premiered a completed version of the Ninth. But I decided instead we're going to do Mahler's Ninth, for the sake of all those people suffering from insomnia. But it's a piece I love very dearly, and
Yes, indeed.
musicians love to play. You're up.
I would love to hear a little bit about how you guys started. You said before we really began the salon that you started the festival in Floyd, Virginia, which was news to me. And I guess I'd love to hear a little bit about the idea that it started from and the early times and how it became what it is a little bit.
Sure. Well, Richard, before we met, had started a similar festival in Arkansas, the Hot Springs Music Festival, and he can talk more about that if he wants to, but and that's where we met. But about 10 years ago, I guess 11 years ago now, the board of that organization was going in a less educational direction, and he was kind of looking at what was the next chapter going to be in his life. And I was just finishing my master's degree in Charleston, South Carolina, and looking at jobs, not really finding anything that I felt really passionate about, and wondering what the next chapter in my life was going to be. And so we decided, let's go off and start a new festival. So we did. And we originally thought about doing it in Chestertown. I grew up in the area and, have family and friends and contacts here and love this area and thought it would be a great place for a festival. We started to explore that. It didn't seem at the time like it was going to work out, partly because it had not yet occurred to us that we could house musicians in private homes. Mm-hmm. So we ended up in Floyd, Virginia, which is a tiny, tiny town. There's one traffic light in the county. It's very rural. I mean, we think of ourselves as rural here in the Chestertown area. Floyd is much more rural even than we are. And Richard had lived there years past, and took me there, and I thought it was a beautiful place, and there's a lot of music there, but not of the classical variety. So we thought maybe we could sort of fit into the music scene there. So we did. That's where the first season of the National Music Festival happened in June 2011.
And many of the musicians, the teachers, the mentors from Arkansas came with us that first year.
Yeah, and the first year it was great. It went really well. The community there loved it, but there just wasn't the level of philanthropy that was needed to sustain the festival over the long term, and for us to be actual paid employees and not pay for the festival on our credit card, which wasn't gonna last long. So
much for my retirement account.
Yeah, so we started looking at Chestertown again, and obviously ended up coming to Chestertown, and the rest is history, because the community has embraced the festival far beyond even my imagination. But it's funny because Richard was, I don't want to say that he was reluctant to move here. Okay, he was a little reluctant to move here. And I remember him saying like, okay, well, at least it's not all that far from DC and Baltimore and Philly, and I can drive over and go to shows and go to the museums and so forth.
Libraries.
Right. He never leaves. He never crosses the Bay Bridge. I mean, even before COVID.
I hardly leave the farm.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
there's
well,
so much going on right here locally, which I don't think he appreciated until we actually got here. But
yeah, it is kind of crazy. I remember, well, my grandmother used to say that if you live in Chestertown, the only difference between living here and living in New York City is that in New York City, if you don't go to everything, people don't notice. But here, if you don't show up, people notice.
true.
So
Also,
it's got that.
parking is much easier here.
Yes,
I
that's
mean,
true.
I've barely had to parallel park since I moved here. In New York, where I grew up, I mean, if I found a parking space within 2.5 miles of Carnegie Hall or Lincoln Center or anything that I wanted to do, I considered myself fortunate.
Right.
And of
Yes.
course, if I was parked in New York City, if I came back to my car and my generator was still intact, I was also very lucky.
Right. And it's free here, parking.
Yeah.
So that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to hijack the conversation. So I hope that anyone will please jump in with any questions or comments or requests or suggestions. But I don't know that much actually in about either of your lives sort of before you moved back here and before the National Music Festival. And I would love to hear, I guess, because I'm always thinking about sort of music and the big picture and why people do it. Why do you do it? You know, what does it do for you, I guess?
You want to start?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in New York City. It actually reminds me of a great quote of John Adams. He says that his grandfather was a soldier so that his father could be a lawyer and a doctor so that he could be an artist or a farmer. And my father was a policeman in New York City. And we grew up in the Bronx, 3 boys in 1 small bedroom, kind of dormitory style. And education was free. My college degree was free. It cost me $35 to go to Queens College and to work with people like Aaron Copland and Luigi Dalla Piccola and just really great people, the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. And my parents would take us to concerts in Central Park and the Naumburg Bandshell. I remember sitting on my father's shoulders and hearing great music, or even in the parks very close to where I lived, even in the Bronx, the New York Philharmonic would come several times every summer. And it was like Disneyland for anyone who liked the arts, going to museums, which were free. Theater, once I discovered Broadway shows, oh my God. And I used to buy the $1 or $2 nosebleed seats, but I saw everything once I discovered that. And my father put up a real fuss when my brother decided to switch from pre-med to music. And he became somewhat ill before I went to college. And so he didn't have any say in it, but he did not want me to go into music. And the first time he came to one of my professional concerts, we flew them up to Rochester, New York. I was conducting the Rochester Philharmonic. And he came backstage, my parents came backstage afterwards, and my father was in tears and he apologized. And he said he had no idea. And after that, he was always the sitting right behind me and the first one to give me a standing ovation until we lost him at age 92. It was such a transformation, both for my parents and for me. And my feeling, I mean, in 1983, I was at the Aspen Music Festival where I had been a student many, many years previously, but this was the first year that I was on the faculty. And in order for me to attend, even though they were paying me, I had to sell my piano, which is a little bit O. Henry, you know, where the gift of the Magi, you sell the piano so you can study music, and then you make the music. And I realized at that point that there had to be an opportunity available to young musicians and whereas musicians spend as much of their student life studying to become great musicians, but without the possibility of the kind of remuneration that they would get being doctors or lawyers, there had to be a forum where musicians could learn their craft without having to go into hock, or with the probability of being able to repay their student loans, which only happened for me fairly recently and not yet for Caitlin.
It'll be a while.
So I decided to start a program where musicians could learn not just where to put their fingers, but the craft, the politics, the learning how to interact with their audiences, how to raise money, how to talk in a public forum without seeming sheepish, but how to survive in the career and also how to have a life. And so I started the festival in Arkansas, and after 15 years of that, I decided that we needed to do it someplace that remained educationally focused. And so that's why we started this festival. And in addition to the festival, I do some guest conducting when I'm allowed to travel, which I look forward to again real soon, because I think one of the reasons I decided to become a conductor was I love to travel. Take it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I grew up in the area, in Caroline County when I was a kid. And it's funny because when I was a kid, my mom used to listen to classical music on the radio. She'd have WBJC on the radio a lot, and she has always loved classical music. And I really disliked it as a child. And I played the flute in fourth grade briefly. I went to public school through fourth grade, and then I was homeschooled after that until I went to Washington College. And so I think the first year I was homeschooled, my mom found me a private flute teacher, but it wasn't a good fit. And so I stopped playing the flute. And when I was 13, I started reading all the Sherlock Holmes stories. And I decided that I wanted to play the violin because Sherlock Holmes played the violin. And, announced this to my parents, and my mother was shocked because she didn't expect that from me at all. And at that point, really, the only thing of importance in my life was horses. And I was, at that, I thought I was going to grow up and be a horse trainer and, really pursue that professionally. And I did actually train horses professionally briefly, and I taught riding lessons for a while. When I was
still doing it
in
now.
college, and I still have horses. I'm not, training anybody else's, but I have my own project. Okay, I know I'm getting on a tangent here, but we rescued a horse in February. I had 3 horses already. I did not need a 4th. I was not looking for a 4th. I don't have time for the horses I had, but I was scrolling through Facebook and saw this gorgeous, sad-looking young horse that was on his way to slaughter and needed to be saved. And I said, Richard, look at this horse. And he looked and said, well, if you want him, you should buy him. And just by way of context, I follow a lot of rescue pages. So there are animals, there are like probably hundreds of animals that I see in my Facebook feed, every week or every month. So it's not like I try to get every animal I see, but for some reason, this one horse really called to me. So I didn't want to rush into it. So I slept on it. And then the next morning, before I even got out of bed, I picked up my phone and sent the money on PayPal to buy the horse. So
he's feral.
He's feral. He's never been handled. He was supposed to have already been castrated. He has not. So he's also a stallion. Surprise. He showed up at the end of February, skin and bones, just a complete mess. It's a slow process in terms of handling him, but I can touch him. I can brush him a little bit. I got a halter on him, and he's turned around physically completely. He's just gorgeous now. And I had to actually stop feeding him so much or he was going to get fat. Anyway, so tangent aside, when I was 13, I decided I wanted to play the violin. And I don't think my parents entirely took me seriously or thought that I would stick with it. So my dad said, okay, fine, but I don't want to pay for lessons. He didn't really want to pay for a violin either. My aunt actually bought me my first violin.
Stephanie?
Yes. So we got this violin, and I'd never touched one. I had no idea. You know, I'd seen people playing. I kind of knew, like, you know, you hold it in your left hand and you put the bow on the strings, but I didn't really know how that worked. And I didn't know what rosin was. And for those who maybe are not string players, rosin is essentially tree sap, but you have to rub it on the bow hair so that it can grip the strings. And if you have a brand new bow that's never had any rosin on it, you can't make a sound at all. So I have very vivid memories of me, my best friend at the time, and both of our mothers, and none of us had ever touched a string instrument before or knew about rosin. And we're like trying to play it, and we could not make any sound whatsoever. So my mom said, okay, this is not going to work. You need lessons. So I got lessons starting when I was 14 and just really loved playing. And for a while, I thought I was just going to pursue being a professional musician. Then I realized I have really terrible stage fright. And I could not play in front of people without like my hands shaking, which is problematic when you're playing.
They call that
an
vibrato.
It was a little intense for vibrato. And I also realized that to pursue it as seriously as I thought I wanted to, you have to practice like 4 hours a day or more. And that was not going to work for me because I get bored easily. I have to do lots of different things, and spending 4 hours a day or more in the practice room was just not going to cut it. So when I was a student at Washington College, I sort of found my way. It was really kind of at the end of my Washington College career. I kind of found my way accidentally into arts administration. I put on a student arts festival when I was a senior. And so I had never heard of arts administration. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but it was. And then the year after I graduated, I went as an apprentice to the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina, and worked with the orchestra management crew and really liked that. And things kind of went from there. And I ended up kind of backing my way into a career in arts administration. And just as an aside, the person who was my boss at Spoleto, Tom Parchman, is now one of our mentors and our director of operations for the festival and has been with us since the very first festival in Floyd. And it's a common joke when he's here that he used to be my boss and now I'm his boss. So I enjoy that very much.
I just want to add that in terms of Caitlin's playing violin and viola, she still does periodically play when it's not a pandemic. And the last time, no, a couple of times, well, we were in Brazil. Was it Brazil? Yes, we were in Brazil.
Yes.
At a festival that was actually based on the one that I started in Arkansas. And the conductor was conducting, I did one concert on their final weekend, and the conductor who invited us was doing the actual final concert, which included Igor Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. And they invited Caitlin on the condition that she played viola in both of those two concerts in the final weekend, which she did. And at one of the final rehearsals, two of the principal violists were ill. And because she was the esteemed invited guest violist, they had her sitting first chair.
Lucky me.
And you did very well once I stopped laughing at you.
I was completely lost. I had no idea what I was doing. And then he walked in the room and I could see him in the back of the hall just laughing. And I was sitting there going, no idea.
I wasn't laughing, I was admiring you. And the courage it took to do that.
I eventually worked my way back to the third chair and I was much happier.
You were far better than the conductor.
That may be true, but it's not saying much.
I wasn't that conductor. I mean, I may have been, but I.
Wow, well, that is fascinating. And Caitlin, I can't tell you how many people, musicians I know who say something like, well, I started on the clarinet and it was fine, or it didn't do anything for me or whatever. And then I picked up, whatever it is. It's amazing how people have to just have that connection, and there's the instrument for you. And sometimes it could be more than one instrument, but if it's not the right one, it doesn't strike that chord, I guess,
so to speak.
make a pun. Yeah. I've had, and in fact, I don't play much anymore at all, but of anything, but I started on the clarinet in 4th grade, or however old you are when band starts. And it was kind of fine. I liked it fine. I knew I liked music, but I somewhere found a flute and picked it up, and it was like, I couldn't stop playing it. And I never even thought that I liked the flute particularly, but it was just the thing that got me. So I don't know what that is, but it's interesting how many people have that story.
Run in the family.
Well, that could be it, but I don't know. There's a lot of instruments in the family that they could have done that for me.
Mariah, this is so much fun to hear, because as much time as you and I have spent together over the past 14 months on Zoom and on phone calls, walking through the neighborhood, I had no idea. And I also played the flute growing up.
Oh.
Not particularly well, but I did play the flute. I think I had the opposite experience of Caitlin. Maybe like when I was in 4th grade, somebody handed me a violin and I was really bad at it. I remember like the school teacher saying, you might want to try something else. And so maybe a few years later picked up the flute, and I haven't stuck with it, but I did enjoy it. I had no idea. And I wanted to ask Caitlin and Richard, I love hearing about people's travels, especially right now in pandemic times, knowing about places. And I'd love to hear more. You mentioned Brazil, what other places have you all gotten to travel and perform and be a part of festivals and things?
Can I start? So I've gone a lot. I have not been to nearly as many places as Richard has. He's traveled a lot more widely than I have, although I've had over the past 10 years the opportunity to travel with him quite a lot when he's been conducting in different places. But I think the place that I most want to mention is I love England. I am such an Anglophile. And so my first boyfriend when I was 17 was British.
There was someone before me.
Yes, I'm sorry. And I went over a number of times to visit him, which was the first time I'd ever traveled out of the country. And that was just such an amazing experience as a teenager to spend time over there. And then I hadn't gone back since the last time I had been there until more recently was 2004. And I didn't go back then until Richard and I went in 2019. That summer we took a trip which was not connected to a concert, which is kind
First time.
Yeah, that's kind of rare for us. But we decided just to take an actual vacation, and we went to London, to Oxford, where we stayed with a woman whose daughter is Steffi Ricketts, who's in the Chester River Chorale. So some of you know Steffi, and her mom lives just outside of Oxford. So when Steffi found out we were going there, she was like, "Oh, you need to stay with my mom." And she just texted her and said, and we'd met her before, so it wasn't like completely unknown, but she just texted her mother and said, "My friends Caitlin and Richard are coming, you need to put them up." So so that was great. And then we went to Dublin, which was our first time in Ireland, and we'll go back and see more of Ireland. But being able to go back to London after having not been there for 15 years was just so wonderful. And it's been something that we've thought about a lot during the pandemic. We've been drinking a lot of British tea. We actually ordered a whole bunch of things from Fortnum and Mason in London. And I have started collecting teacups, which I started on that trip. Actually, I bought some fancy teacups for like £2.50 at a flea market in Greenwich.
At the beginning of the trip, so she could lug it around for the rest of it.
Yes, he laughed at me because I carried 6 like bone china teacups around for the entire trip, but I did not break any. And we've been, cooking a lot because we're not going to restaurants over the last year. So lots of the British things that we've learned to cook, and Richard's got a subscription to BritBox now. So been watching lots of great British TV.
Murder Village mysteries.
So it's kind of nice how the travel even though we can't go anywhere, that travel has kind of sustained us during this time, and we look forward to going back, hopefully the fall of 2022. Oh, except he says he's never going back because if you go to any English village, you're going to get murdered.
I mean, that is true,
I
obviously.
mean, and after seeing all the Inspector Morse, he worked his way through the entire Inspector Morse series, and he kept texting me and saying, we're never going back to Oxford again. It's too dangerous.
It used to be just because of the cuisine, but that's not the case anymore.
Yeah, the food's very good now.
Let's see, I've not been to Antarctica and I haven't been to Australia, but I've been pretty much everywhere else or conducted there.
Right. And how many times have you been to Europe? Counting Europe and the UK?
About 54, 55 times. There was a 2-year period I worked in London with the London classical players, but I was teaching at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So I got lots of frequent flyer miles. But most of my travel had been for work, which is one of the nicest things about it, just meeting people, getting to hear how other musicians approach music and seeing what happens when you mix it up and with or without the language. The first time I conducted in Italy, sorry, not the first time I conducted in southern Italy, I was doing Mahler's Third Symphony in Lecce, which is a beautiful town of 500,000 with great seafood and vegetables. And so it's in 6 movements, 6 sections. And so I learned my Italian in about 2 weeks and I did the best I could. But at the end of the first rehearsal, I was telling the orchestra that tonight's rehearsal was going to be the 6th movement. And I called it Sexto Movimento. And the orchestra started cheering, bravo, maestro. Apparently I said, tonight's rehearsal is going to begin with the sex movement. And then there was an orchestra in Klagenfurt, Austria. I was conducting a concert of movie music, and the orchestra asked me not to speak in German. Right after that, I was conducting, actually before we were together, I was conducting in Munich, and the orchestra told me my German was brilliant. There it is.
I guess everything is relative.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if, so I also used to travel for work a lot with totally different kind of music, but with the band that I worked with. And I find now that I have a hard time, not a hard time, but I'm more comfortable traveling when I'm working than on vacation because you have something to do. You have some automatic sort of contacts in the community where you are. It feels more like you're really in the place instead of just sort of skating over the top. And I wonder if you guys feel the same way.
Yeah, in 2017, I had a concert in Dubrovnik. And then almost 2 months later, I had a concert in...
No, it was a month later.
Was it?
Yeah.
Right. We had a concert in Torun, Poland, the hometown of Copernicus. And so we had time in between and we just leisurely visited friends and traveled and tried foods we hadn't. But in Dubrovnik, they put us up in the home of an artist. And this was just after the Game of Thrones thing. So all these crazy people were running through the street saying, shame, shame. We ate really well. It was very hot. The food was brilliant. But we had the best time when we had the town to ourselves after dark. But because we had all of these contacts, they gave us these city passes. We were able to take a ferry to one of the islands where we went swimming and drank too much and came back and had rehearsals. But it's just, it's very different when you have people who really appreciate you, who know your name and who know the town. They actually arranged for a tour with one of the musicians who's also a tour guide. And he took us to see all of these things that we never would have seen otherwise. It is really nice to travel when there is a contact in advance.
Yeah, and I find that's, you have a little structure to your day also, and you kind of, you're more, I think I'm more likely to make use of or take advantage of where I am if I have to be at the gig at 7 o'clock or something, you know, I don't know. It puts that little extra pressure on that gives you
Yeah.
some motivation maybe. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, my concert in Dubrovnik was at the ship's palace, which was also used as part of Westeros. For those of you who had ever seen Game of Thrones, it was very exciting.
That sounds exciting, although I have not seen Game of Thrones, but I live in the world enough to know what that means.
And no one was beheaded, so it was perfect. So far as I know,
At least not during the concert.
not during the concert.
I
Wow.
love hearing these stories of travel and music. And I know Mariah and I have each popped in with a few questions, but I know we have a number of other, Wood families and beyond on with us. Does anybody else have any questions while we have Caitlin and Richard all to ourselves? This is really a treat.
Yeah, Christine.
Question for Richard. How many instruments do you have to be able to play, somewhat prolific, obviously a great degree of understanding for conducting an orchestra?
My clarinet skills used to be pretty good. Right now, I'm a lapsed clarinetist. I also studied the horn, the cello, keyboard very badly, voice.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you also have sung in the past.
Yeah, I actually did study voice with Phyllis Curtin and with my conducting teacher's wife, who used to sing at the Bayreuth Festival in Bayreuth, Germany. And so for a while I thought maybe I'd do that. But again, the world is a better place that I don't play anything much except maybe slide whistle in public. I think what's more important I think it's important to know what it's like.
Wait, you play the tractor, don't you?
Yes.
The tractor organ, yes.
Herman.
And the theremin.
The theremin, yes.
Ooh, that's exciting.
But I think it's important to know what all the instruments require,
Yeah.
so that you can know what to ask for without raising everyone's eyebrows or winding up with lots of rotten tomatoes hurled in your general direction. But I think it's also important to know what it's like sitting in an orchestra and knowing what you want to look for in a conductor. You want to know where the pulse is. You want to know how loud, how soft, and how to phrase things. And the conductor should be well enough versed that all of those things, including are people in the audience hitting their watches or just looking at them frequently as to how quick or how slow something should be within the context of whatever research and study I've done.
I think you should very briefly tell, because I know that we have several choral singers among us. I think you should briefly tell the story of the chorus that you conducted in Baltimore years ago.
Right. I was the third conductor of the Arion Menor Corps, the men's chorus that was part of a nationwide organization of German expats. The chorus was started in 1850. I was the third conductor. The second conductor was a gentleman named Jacob Eltermann. Eltermann is German for old man. They fired him when he was in his mid-60s because they got tired, mid-90s, because they got tired of hearing the same jokes. And he was like 96, tall, dapper, always with a pipe, but they just got tired of hearing the same jokes. And we rehearsed at 26 South Broadway in Fells Point at the home of the Baltimore Kickers Soccer Club, right next to a porn movie theater, which I think is still there. And every Tuesday night, we would get together. My youngest singer was in his 50s. The lead tenor was well in his 90s. And they all rehearsed with a stein of beer in one hand and their canes in the other. They were god awful, but they had such a good time. And then after they were done rehearsing, we would go to the back room where August, I can't remember his last name, who was a butcher, used to bring sausages and beef tartare and all of these great things to eat, and we'd finish more beer. It was really fun. They didn't sound good, but it was really fun.
Sometimes it's not about sounding good.
It's true.
And very often it's not about sounding good at all. So it's,
And that's really true, Mariah. I mean, yes, artistic standards are lovely things to have, but the impact of music goes so far beyond that.
I think my measurement of success is, were they better after the rehearsal period than they had been beforehand? And that goes for whether they are, a great orchestra or people who are amateurs in the real sense of the word.
Yeah, that's a great standard. I know, I used to teach early childhood music and learned about the way that the brain reacts, responds to music. And now they can do all these, visualizations and really see what's happening inside the brain. And, it's when you're making music together, even if it's with one other person, and even if neither one of you are any good at all, it's got such beneficial effects, on the brain. And I just love that. And I love that that's accessible, even if you're singing along in the car with your kids, or if you're in a great orchestra or a great chorus, singing great music or playing great music. So that's one of my favorite things, is that it's accessible to everyone to be able to glean that benefit, and it doesn't matter whether you've put in those 4 hours a day your whole life of practice or not.
Of course, I've heard your stepdad sing Christmas carols with you while you were driving.
That's
up, and
he was still benefiting, even if his listeners weren't. Alan, it looks like maybe you have a question.
Yeah, well, it's a comment. I had a great experience at Interlochen, Michigan in the festival chorus, which I think anyone could get into. And it was conducted by a University of Michigan guy, probably long before your time, named Maynard Klein, but he was really remarkable. And I was just, I think it was between junior and senior year of high school, and singing with adults. And we were singing with the counselors and the staff. And so it was a great experience. And I think those kind of experiences where kids can sing with adults are really powerful things, even if the musical quality, but he really worked as hard. We did the block sacred service in Hebrew and the Messiah all in 8 weeks. And that was great, a great experience. But I wanted to mention, just as you said something about teaching musicians to speak in public, and that was something that I heard from the Heifetz Festival organizers in Stanton, Virginia. They said that was one of the things they wanted to stress, that they were very comfortable. And every time I heard some chamber music concerts, and they would always introduce the piece. And they said that was something that they wanted to teach them, that's important.
Yeah, I've met so many musicians who tell me they're perfectly comfortable playing their instrument in front of people, but they're terrified to speak. I'm the opposite. I'll happily get on stage and talk, but don't make me play the violin. I've gotten better about singing in front of people, though. I'm actually far more comfortable singing in front of an audience than I am playing an instrument.
And you've gotten quite good at it too.
Better than I used to be. This is Luna, by the way.
Is Luna a goat?
No, she's a shepherd.
She's.
Oh, I can only see the top of her head.
There she is.
Oh, great. Well, actually,
okay.
I see that it's already, I lost track of time, and it's already 10 minutes of 6. So I'm sorry that we've kept people over their 45-minute limit. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'd love to, can't wait to, see you in person and hear more from you. And I think Anne is gonna wrap us up here.
Let me just quickly say what a joy it's been to have been part of the National Music Festival chorus several times, singing with real live orchestras, major works. Most of the time conducted by Richard himself. It's just been a fantastic experience, and I hope I get to do more of it. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get to do that again at some point in the future, I hope.
We have some interesting plans.
Yeah.
Robin, that leads me right into sort of what I was going to say to finish up as a toast, which is, to thank you both for being here. In some ways, it was really fun to not have a specific thing that we had to talk about, because we could ask you questions and hear about your journeys in life and your background and experience and travels and all of those fun things. So what you and Mariah and Robin have all, alluded to is just the power of music for each and every person, whether it's a way to bring people that joy when you're singing in the car together or singing as a group, like Robin mentioned, or whether it's getting to know a new place in the world and the people there and music bringing us together. That I think that music is just, something that really does bring us together in so many ways. So cheers to that and to you both. And thank you for being here today and sharing your time and love and enthusiasm with us. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers. And thanks so much for having us. This has been great. We really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And we'll certainly have you back when you have a festival that you want to tell us all about.
We will look forward to that.
As will we. Maybe we can do it in person.
Yeah, even better.
Ciao.
Great.
Pleasure
Good
to
night.
see you
Thanks,
all.
guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.